All right, sports fans, what we got here is a 1999 Chrysler 300M. It's also very similar to Dodge Intrepid or Chrysler Concord, I believe it is, LHS perhaps. Now, I made a video on how to do the front brakes on this car, calipers, rotors, and everything. Unfortunately, being new at YouTube, I accidentally deleted the video. So, we're going to do the back brakes, and it's actually pretty similar. And any major differences, perhaps I'll make a video covering none. But first, obviously, the thing we have to do is we have to take off our rear wheel. So, we will get going on that. One quick tip for you, lug nut stuck in a socket. Usually get them out that way. There you go. Just watch where the lug nut went. Tip number two is probably going to want to use the right size. I was going to use some impact sockets because you're supposed to use impact sockets on the impact wrench, right? Well, guess what? What is this? It's a 3/4 or 13/16. Let's see what that is. 3/4. And doesn't quite fit perfect. Pretty good though. These lug nuts from the factory on almost any car, it's got a chrome lug nut. That's not really a chrome lug nut. It's a stainless steel cap on a regular old nut. And it tends to give a little bit and get a little distorted, so your wrenches and your sockets still fit on them as well as you'd like them to. Let's try, even though it's not an impact socket, let's try 19mm instead. And they say you're not supposed to use regular chrome sockets on an impact wrench. They could fracture. I suppose if you weren't wearing safety glasses, they might put out your eye. Or you can just hope nothing bad happens. So that's working pretty good right now. Seems to work a little better. They must be 19mm, not 3/4, huh? So that's 2, 3, 4 out of 5. We're on good. Okay, there's a perfect example, sports fans, of how you got to make sure you have your socket on those stainless steel cap nuts good, because it's going to just end up spinning and you'll end up doing a lot more harm than good. You really got to take your time to do the job right. Otherwise you run into problems. So when you run into the problem, you got to take drastic measures, like pounding the socket onto the nut. And it's still not going on good. So try putting the 3/4 on there. See what we got. There we go. You should wear safety glasses when you do that too. I was squinting. Alright, now like I was mentioning, these lug nuts, they're not chrome lug nuts like you'd buy at performance auto parts stores. On almost all these OEM applications, it's just a stainless steel cap on top of a regular nut. And you probably can't tell that by looking at it in the camera, okay, seeing that on video. You probably, but believe me, in real life, even if you're not an expert at this stuff, even if you're a novice, you'll be able to tell. So, unless you're careful, you end up having a thing where you boogered up the nut, and then of course you had to pound the socket on, and then you got a socket stuck on a nut. We'll see what we can do as far as that's concerned. Let's do this. Look at that. That's my favorite way to do it. If you're really lucky, you'll lose both the nut and the socket. Okay, that'll really help your day. So that's one of the added advantages. But you'll notice here, see how I boogered that up? See, this is where I'm going. God, I'm glad this ain't my car, because it's not really my problem, is it? The ideal thing would be to buy a new nut there, or go to the junkyard and just get one, because yeah, you can always take care of it in the shop where I pounded the socket on with a hammer, but what if you have a flat tire on the side of the road? That might not fit on your lug wrench as easily as a good one. So this is just one position where I'm glad this isn't my car. All right, the next thing is, once we got all our lug nuts off, we have to get the wheel off. And quite often with these aluminum wheels, they don't want to come off. Now you can try kicking them off, pounding them off with a sledgehammer. Let's see if it wants to come off at all. Look at that. Look at that. That car doesn't even need lug nuts. You know, what do you don't even need them. let's just take her for a spin. This is what I have found to be the best way to take a stuck wheel off a car. And it's the great news about it is, even if you have a flat tire on the side of the road, you can take advantage of this. All right, by far and away, the best method I have ever found for removing a wheel that's stuck on a hub because it's an aluminum wheel that is corroded onto a cast iron wheel hub. This is by far and away the best way. You take another wheel and tire because it's nice and soft, so you know you're not going to do any damage, but it's also heavy. So you know you've got a lot of force going. You just take that wheel and tire and that's all there is to it, folks. I have never seen an easier way to take off a stuck wheel. All right, once we get the wheels off, we can inspect and see what we need to take care of. The other thing on a lot of new cars with the aluminum wheels, you can peek through those holes in the wheel and you'll be able to see your rotor. And if it's got deep grooves in it like this, yeah, it's a pretty safe bet that everything's junk. I mean, that means that the pad material, the brake pad material has been totally worn away, so it's just rubbing on the rivets and the plate that the brake pads are made out of. And so you know you need new rotors, you know you need new brake pads, and when things get this bad, look like they've been neglected for this long, it's a pretty safe bet you need calipers too. So we're going to get going on this, and we're going to remove the caliper first. And that's a 10 millimeter bolt holding on these calipers. There's two 10 millimeter bolts with 10 millimeter heads. And I have found if something is tighter, you expect it to be tight. The bigger a drive socket wrenches you use, the better off you're going to be. I noticed that on front wheel nuts, that big nut that goes on, holds on the wheel hub and bearing assembly. It's a hell of a lot easier to remove them with a 3/4 inch drive than a 1/2 inch drive. I can't explain why, but it just seems like you're going to break a 1/2 inch breaker bar trying to remove one of those big nuts. Sometimes they're 22 millimeter. And so whenever possible, when you're dealing with something tight, you want to use the larger drive. So in this case, we're going to use a 1/2 inch drive as opposed to 3/8. And of course, the right-hand thread, so you've heard that term, righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. I like to think counterclockwise, because in a circle, you know, yeah, you're right hand, you're going to the right there, but here you're going to the left, you know. So I like to think in terms of clockwise. Right-hand thread, you know, theirs is counterclockwise, this is clockwise. So counterclockwise is loosen, okay? So that's the way I think about it. A lot of times if I'm doing something upside down or backward too, I'll take the wrench off and I'll just look at it and just make sure that I'm untightened or loosened, because you certainly don't want to be tightening something when you think you're loosening, and vice versa. So actually these came pretty darn easy, at least the first one did. Let's see how the second one does. And it's something like this, a brake caliper that's on a car that's been driven for years in the salty winters. You do want to make sure that you have that socket squarely over the head of that bolt. You don't want to kind of repeat what I did with the lug nut, do you? So you want to avoid that. We may or may not get new bolts with calipers. Maybe the new calipers have bolts with them. But we don't want to find out that we don't. Once we open up the caliper box themselves. So you're best off to try to avoid ruining things in the first place rather than worrying about how to deal with what you've ruined after that's happened. So that's all there is to taking out those bolts. Now, this caliper may or may not come off easily. If it does not come off easily, we will push this piston back to have some more clearance. And it's not coming off easily. So let me go get a screwdriver and we'll just pry against that piston on that caliper, make us have a little more clearance. All right, so we will pry this apart, and there's usually a hole in the caliper where you can get in there, and you should get just enough room to pry back the brake pads, you really don't have to worry about ruining anything too much either, because especially if you're in a situation where you decided everything on here is junk, it's going to have to be replaced. Kind of take some of the pressure off you. Some of the good news about the bad news if you figure everything's shot. Now let's take a look at this. This looks interesting. These things are pretty well shot, so we don't have to worry about ruining anything, so we can be as mean as we want. Look at that. That is totally shot. That's totally shot there. Right down to the rivets. But look at the inside one. That one's not bad at all, is it? Not bad at all. What does that tell us? That tells us that this caliper isn't functioning exactly perfectly. It's kind of staying in one place, and you know, only one side is doing the work. So this needs to be, they need to be lubricated on the slide surfaces, and there's a good chance that that piston wasn't returning enough. But we did wear out one side of the pads and not the other, so something's not quite perfect. So the easiest way to take care of that, remedy that, is just go with everything new, and we were leaning that way anyway. So we're going to put on new calipers, new rotors, new pads, and we will put a little bit of lube where these calipers slide on the mounting surface, the backing plate, whatever you want to call it. In this case, we're going to replace these brake calipers, but if we were going to reuse them, we would have to push this piston all the way back into its bore. And when it's pushed all the way back, this part right here is just about the exact same level with this piece, this ring right here, okay? So that's how far it's traveled over the course of this brake pad wearing down and this brake pad wearing down. So in other words, this distance here is about the difference in the thickness of these two, what's left of these brake pads, and the lining of brand new brake pads. That's how much it's worn away. It isn't very much, is it? And but the piston, it moved that far. When these brakes clamp, they don't move very far. We're talking a fraction of an inch, the difference when you clamp on those brakes. It does not move very far, but that's the way they get the power. There's, I think, what is it, 3,000 pounds of pressure on brakes? It's a lot of pressure. Pounds per square inch on disc brakes in particular. So that's why you need high pressure hoses, and that's why you have to inspect your lines, and if they're rusted, you're probably going to want to replace them. You're dealing with some pretty high pressures there. Now, as I mentioned before, if we were reusing these, we would take a clamp and we would push this piston back into its bore. When that happens, obviously it's going to push all that brake fluid that's in the caliper back through the line to the master cylinder. So when you do things like that, when you do a brake job, you're going to want to check the level of the brake fluid in your master cylinder. Now let's go take a look at that. There's two schools of thought on this. You know, some people, they top off everything. They see something low, they top it off. And with even their master cylinder, it looks low, they top it off. And that is a good thing, except for when you are going to put new brakes on your car and you have to push the pistons on those calipers back, because the level on this master cylinder will rise. And if you don't remove any of it, it will overflow, and brake fluid tends to ruin plastic and paint, and it just makes a mess. It also attracts water and makes things rust. If it spills on any nuts or bolts or fittings down there, it'll make them rust. So you really don't want to spill brake fluid if you don't, if you can prevent it. And this is particularly true if you're the kind of person that tops off their fluids all the time. And so there's pluses and minuses each way. If you don't have any leaks in your brake system and your fluid level's down, well, when you push back your pistons, your caliper, it's going to go right back to where you need it. On the other hand, the guy who tops off his master cylinder, that's not a bad idea, because if you get a hole in your brake line from rust or what have you, that doesn't mean your car is not going to have any brakes immediately. It just means it leaks. So you'll be able to pump up your brakes and at least get your car stopped. Now, obviously, the more fluid you have in your master cylinder, the more brakes you have, braking ability you'll have in the event of a failure. So instead of instantly running out of fluid, if you were quite low on it, you'll probably be able to stop your car, and if it started rolling, you'll probably be able to stop it again. So from a safety standpoint, it's probably not a bad idea to keep that master cylinder level at the full mark, and when it comes time to redo brakes and you're going to be pushing back them caliper pistons, you're going to have to suck some of that brake fluid out so you don't spill over and make a mess. Okay, one thing good, almost everything, with cars and things get worse. Everything gets more of a pain in the ass and crummier, but there is one thing that's better. Brake rotors. In the old days, the rotors and the hubs were one piece, so in order to change rotors, you had to mess around with bearings, taking off the nut, and you had to worry about bearing preloads and things of that nature. Of course, you did get the bearings inspected and whenever you had a brake job, so I guess that was the upside of it. But here we don't even have to mess with bearings. All we have to do is pull off this hub and put this hub on. And one thing way they're telling is you look at the brand new hub and yeah, there isn't really anything to it. There ain't no bearing in there, so you don't have to worry about that part. Another indicator is when you see these clips here, you might not be able to see these on a camera, but there are these clips that go over these lug studs, at least one of them. And you don't have to save these. They really aren't necessary. They're just there to keep the drum or hub or whatever you want to call this thing on the car while it was rolling down the assembly line. That's all that is for. It really serves no function at all on the car once it's being used. Because obviously that wheel being sandwiched up against here with 5 big lug nuts holding on are going to do way more than this little clip is ever going to do. So we'll just take that sucker right off. And we probably, almost certainly, will not reuse it. You'll see on a lot of cars too, on their rotors, they'll have, Fords and Acuras have it, they have some screws here, and they'll always be rusted out. They're always a bear to take out. So you can just drill the heads off those, and you never have to worry about replacing them. Once again, those just to hold the rotor on the car while it's rolling down the assembly line. Little teeny bolt. I don't know what the metric equivalent is, but it's about the size of a number 10 or 1/4 inch at the biggest bolt, and it really doesn't serve any purpose at all once the car is being used. So now we'll see if this will come off. Now obviously the emergency brake is not applied because it spins, and that's another thing too. Whenever you're doing brakes, rear brakes, you want to make sure the emergency brake is not applied. Usually they say in the instruction manuals, oh, you got to set the emergency brake. Okay, well this is the exception where even the manuals they don't set the parking brake is when you're doing rear brakes. So we'll take off this. This did have 2 of these stupid little clips on it. All right. Now we got to get these old rotors off, and they're almost certainly frozen to that hub. So a little whacking is in order. We don't have to worry about ruining anything because we're replacing this. Probably should wear safety glasses when you do this. I'm squinting. You can see, look at that crud. Look at that crud. That's just probably the iron hub rotor reacting with the aluminum wheel. There we go. Now, the parking brake shoes look just fine. Doesn't look, of course, it's an automatic transmission car, so the parking brake never gets used. So of course they're fine. There might be an adjuster on these too where I could have backed that off. Maybe and made that a little bit easier to take off, but it's off now. I'm not going to worry too much about any of this parking brake mechanism, because I know for a fact the person driving this car is never going to use the parking brake. And even if we had everything perfect in this area, the cables have never had any attention paid to them at all. So we're just going to go with the advice here for them that don't use the parking brake. So now we will start to put everything back together, and not too hard. The first thing is, whenever you put new rotors on, take brake cleaner and spray it all over and wipe it off with a rag, because these are shipped with anti-corrosion material. Some people call it cosmoline, and it just keeps these from rusting in the box. Because a brake rotor, if you ever notice, you look at a car that's just been sitting in the driveway after it rains. Just a humid day will make these things rust. So they rust very, very rapidly. And as long as the car gets used, it's no big deal. One time stopping it cleans it right up. But we're going to clean that material off it because it is a petroleum product, and it's almost like having grease or oil on your brakes, and they'll be less effective. So let's get that cleaned off, and then we'll get that part put on.